Okay, we've been talking in class about how the Great Depression began, what the causes of the Great Depression were, and you now know that the president during the time period was Herbert Hoover, and he was the first president who had to deal with the crisis that the nation faced. This lecture goes with a handout, which I don't have a copy of, a paper copy of, which says, has history judged him too harshly? And it's just got two columns on it. One is where he was flexible and responsive, and one was where he's inflexible and unresponsive. Okay? So let's go straight to the PowerPoint and talk about the things that Hoover did, which were flexible and responsive, and then we'll look at the things he did that were inflexible and unresponsive. Okay? So it's really important to give Hoover some credit for being the first president who ever faced this kind of economic problem, and it's easy to judge him by modern standards in terms of the size and scope of the government, but back then the government really had not played a role in trying to help take care of the economic welfare of the people. So one thing he did do is he created 800 million construction jobs. He spent 800 million going to construction jobs. The most famous example is he had the Boulder Dam built, which dammed up the Colorado River out west, and it will be renamed the Hoover Dam after him, one of the most ambitious engineering projects in American history. This is kind of an example, though, of Hoover's problem. He does create the jobs, but he does not, these aren't jobs you can get anywhere. You actually have to go to that site out west to get the jobs. So it's not really a jobs program that is accessible by people who live everywhere. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation was founded by Hoover, and it loaned money to banks and to businesses who needed business loans in order to stay in business and keep people employed. So this is another way in which this is kind of typical Hoover. He's willing to loan money to businesses, but he's not willing to loan money to individuals. That's what the Reconstruction Finance Corporation was. He also passed the Home Loan Bank Act, which did loan money to help people make their house payments, and that money went directly to the mortgage company that the money was owed to. So he did help keep people in their homes. He also passed the Federal Farm Marketing Board, was established while he was president, and this was trying to help market agricultural goods. If you remember, he had helped double the food supply during World War I as being the very successful head of the Food Administration. And now the problem is that they have excess produce being made on farms, and so they're trying to market it. If you know the modern campaigns like Pork, the Other White Meat, or Got Milk, Beef, It's What's for Dinner, those are modern marketing slogans that try and help market American beef and meats and produce. So that's a modern equivalent of what they were trying to do back then to try and increase demand for farm products. Also, he did cut taxes. Hoover kind of followed classical trickle-down economic theory, where he cut taxes across the board, but they most heavily helped the upper class, hoping that that would lead to investment and create jobs. He also asked for voluntary wage freezes and price freezes. So what he wanted business owners to do is to quit cutting people's pay, and he wanted them to quit raising prices for goods. The problem is that these had to be voluntary. We are not a command economy. We're a free market economy, and so the government can't set wages or prices, and so asking businessmen to voluntarily go along with this is kind of weak. Because people aren't in business, they're in business to make a profit, and they're not going to, keep in business and lose money. So those voluntary wage and price controls were not very effective, to say the least. All right. The way in which Hoover was unresponsive and inflexible included the following things. First of all, he refused to give any cash payments to the poor. This was part of his belief in rugged individualism, which is the idea that if you start giving people cash money, that it'll undermine their work ethic and make them dependent on the government. And so he said that people should really not get cash payments from the government. Also, he thought this was really, the welfare of the people was really left to private churches and charities, that was not the role of the government necessarily, that if people needed help, they could go to charities and churches, and that wealthier people should give generously to those causes, and that it should all be administered through those institutions, not government. Because he believed in limited government. He thought that the government should be limited in its size and its scope. For example, the Democratic Congress that he oversaw wanted to spend $40 billion fighting the Great Depression, and Hoover wanted to spend $2 billion. So you can see they just have a fundamental difference in terms of the size and scope of government. Also, it was while he was president that the World War I veterans that had received really no aid upon their reentry into American society, they had been promised a pension of about $500 when they got older, and they decided that they wanted it sooner rather than later because so many of them were in desperate straits due to the Depression. And they started camping out on the, right outside the Capitol, to lobby for the passage of the Patman Bill. The Patman Bill was the law they wanted passed that would give them their money early. And you've got to remember the context of these times. We're in a Red Scare period where we're afraid of communism, and remember that one of the ways they think a communist revolution might start would be some kind of worker revolt or revolution. And here you have men with military experience who are desperately poor, camped out in Washington, lobbying for the passage of a bill, and when it does not pass, the bill does not pass, Hoover's then stuck with, well, what to do with these people? I mean, he can't allow them to just kind of let their this is not that hard what I'm trying to think of. He can't let their frustration just fester out in front of the Capitol. And so he orders Douglas MacArthur, future World War II hero, he orders him to go disperse the World War I veterans, and MacArthur kind of oversteps his bounds, and he is quite violent. The tanks roll in, tear gas is used, a fire breaks out, a child is killed. It's really quite horrible what happens to the bonus army. That's what they're called, the bonus army. They want their bonus early. And Hoover, instead of selling MacArthur out and saying, hey, this guy kind of overstepped his authority and things kind of went haywire, and instead of kind of selling Douglas MacArthur out, he took full responsibility for what had happened there. And he just seemed really heartless. That was kind of the final straw that made Hoover seem like he was just a heartless man who gassed and hurt these World War I veterans who were so desperate. So that's what the bonus army being sent away without relief is about. Okay? So, my question for you, also, by the way, things related to Hoover's name became synonymous with the people's disappointment. So Hoover blankets were newspapers that you would cover yourself with to try and stay warm. Hoovervilles were shanty towns that popped up made out of cardboard and scrap metal and those things as people lost their houses. And Hoover flags were people's pockets turned inside out to show that they were penniless. So even his name became associated with just the most abject poverty and signs of the Depression. So the question is, Hoover is basically seen as kind of a failure, like he didn't do anything to help the Depression, and so the final evaluation gets at this idea. Is Hoover more like this, an inflexible blockhead who didn't really get it and didn't do anything to help the American people, the kind of more typical stereotype of Hoover, or is he more like this, a rubber band, right? He actually did stretch to some degree to be in keeping with the times. Maybe some people have suggested that we're really holding Hoover to a modern standard, that he just really couldn't be a person ahead of his time. Never before had we thought it was the government's job to make sure people were not poor. And so the fact that it took him a while to come around and realize the depth and breadth of this problem is just kind of asking a lot of someone. So the question is he inflexible and should have known better? Or was he actually flexible enough during his time period, and we're just asking him to be a visionary who was ahead of his time, which isn't a fair standard to hold a president to. So think about that, which one you think is the case, and we'll talk a little bit about it in class. Okay? Thanks for watching.